Pundits say South Korea is on track to become a defense powerhouse as its homegrown defense equipment secures broader global demand. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, June 30th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. It's not simply charity that begins at home in today's world of rampant military confrontations. Strength also begins at home, and South Korea has been dedicated to developing a powerful defense industry to protect national interests and to promote those of its partners. For more on this, I have independent journalist Kelly Kasulis Cho here in the studio. Kelly, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, it's great to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with you. Let's begin with details of the defense discussions between Seoul and Tokyo this past weekend, during which they talked about bolstering defense equipment partnership.
Yeah, and so the kind of newsy takeaway was that they would increase cooperation in this area. That when they have these meetings, they don't tend to like break down very specifically like what kind of weaponry or what kind of hardware. But I mean, the kind of bigger picture thing that I would take from this is that it's a sort of institutionalization of the friendlier nature of ties. I think these Seoul and Tokyo recognize that they have a fair bit in common. They both see a threat in North Korea. They both are somewhat unnerved by an increasingly assertive China. They're both U.S. allies, but I think they are kind of grappling with the onset of a less reliable United States. I mean, a U.S. that they still consider to be their key security ally, but that is maybe less willing to attend to quite as many of their security needs as they had before. And just domestically, I mean, I thought it was notable that they said that this was their fourth face-to-face meeting since November, which is quite a lot. I mean, like I remember at a very different time of the Korea-Japan relationship when there used to be quite a lot of opposition to this. Like when they had something like this, a defense ministers meeting, it was a big thing, and there were protests, and there was, you could read in the domestic media a lot of fretting over whether or not it was prudent or whether or not it was safe for South Korea to trust Japan as a defense partner, whether or not it was wise to share any kind of defense data with Japan. I mean, ever since the KC summit of a few years ago, like they've been sharing real-time missile data, and they've been, operating more kind of in sync with each other. And I just, what I would take away from it is that there's more and more people who are getting more and more familiar with the idea of South Korea and Japan as, if not formal partners, at least, kind of de facto or practical partners, and having these various ways that they get along and they cooperate. And I'd say that's, overall a good thing. I think it's something that helps the two sides meet a number of overlapping needs.
Right, and Kelly, I understand quite a number of foreign policy experts have been applauding the advancements in Seoul-Tokyo ties, highlighting their broader implications for U.S. interests. Could you tell us a bit more about what they've been saying?
Well, I'm sure they're applauding it because, as we know, Japan and South Korea don't always get along, right? And it can create quite a headache for stakeholders in Washington and elsewhere. So, I mean, what we've seen since the Yoon administration is the two countries kind of warming up to each other again. And then we kind of saw that shocking turnaround where President Lee, who at one point I believe was on a hunger strike over some of his issues with Korea-Japan relations, playing drums with the Prime Minister of Japan. And now we see, that this more serious diplomatic renewal of relations is continuing to unfold. So I think it's generally been seen as a very good thing within Washington. Stephen mentioned North Korea. When it comes to intelligence sharing, that has always been a sticking point or an issue when South Korea and Japan have not gotten along. So, for instance, there have been times where they are both relaying their information, say, during a North Korean ballistic missile launch to Washington, but not to each other. And so in those kind of situations, you want those closer ties. I also think, as the United States has taken on a more adversarial relationship with China, for its part, it at least sees a closer Japan and South Korea as, again, one less headache within the East Asia region, one less thing to worry about, but also potentially helpful when the U.S. is thinking about things like what they call strategic flexibility, this idea that they want to use their allies within East Asia potentially for greater purposes. So, yeah, I think it's been celebrated. It looks like it'll probably continue, and it's probably in South Korea's interest right now to have a strong relationship with Japan, especially when it's dealing with kind of an unpredictable Trump administration.
Right then. Stephen, we've also been told that these talks between the defense authorities of Seoul and Tokyo, they touched upon the recent joint air drill by Beijing and Moscow. I believe that drill took place this past Saturday. Could you tell us a bit about these drills and their importance?
They involve various kinds of aircrafts, I mean, bombers and refueling tankers and jet fighters. And what I thought the Chinese take on it was that it was a display of shared determination and capability. What I thought was interesting about it was we hear a lot, and there's been some high-level political displays about how China and Russia, and to a lesser extent North Korea, are forming this kind of, they have an interest in forming this kind of alternative world order and of carving out an influential bloc of countries that can have a lot of control over the waters and the airspaces and the trade routes and the economy of Asia. And this is a kind of, I think, a demonstration that, like, in addition to sharing a kind of ideological framework and in addition to having political things in common, whereas these are, you know, in some senses, these are nominally democratic states, but they're quite strict in how they manage civil and political rights. And they have a certain, you know, imperialistic or expansionist mindset in how they deal with some of their neighbors. This is, I think, a demonstration that that sort of shared ideological understanding is coming to have practical applications, and this is seeing the two of them, you know, cooperate on real kind of nuts and bolts defense displays that are, I think, intended to demonstrate that they are very active and they are very keen to be present and aware of what's happening in their environs. And as there are these disputed waterways and disputed airspaces in this region, they want to demonstrate that they are right on top of this and they are, you know, ready and able to take part in any kind of contest that takes place there. So I think this is something that, you know, we just talked about South Korea and Japan. I think this is the kind of thing that they are looking at when they feel as though it is incumbent on them to have a closer and a more interoperable relationship.
Right, and staying with security, Kelly, political claims of South Korea, it appears to have been stepping up to the plate where defense is concerned, while the Trump administration has been stepping down, if you will. What have been some of the notable advances here in South Korea with regard to its defense industry?
Well, I think, first of all, Korea is really stepping up for itself and it's in its own interests, and that's not a critique. But I think Korea is becoming a bigger defense industry player because, quite frankly, it's a major moneymaker. Korea is an export-driven economy. It really benefits from that. It's a way for Korea to have more diplomatic pull beyond soft power, if you will, right? And also Korea with, as you mentioned, a more kind of unpredictable Trump administration that in moments appears to threaten the state of the alliance so far as reducing the number of U.S. troops stationed on the Korean Peninsula or making Korea pay more for U.S. troops' presence. It's really a way for them to build up some kind of feeling of more self-reliance. And that kind of language has existed at least since the Clinton administration. But I think what Korea is doing is it's creating a contingency plan where it's better able to defend itself, especially as the number of men that are available to serve in the military declines with the aging and population crisis. It's really important to invest in that technology. So what we're seeing is Korea is hitting some major landmarks. I believe it's the second largest supplier within NATO. I read that the four biggest companies, Korean companies that are in the defense industry, have made about $37 billion in 2026. That's like a four-fold increase compared to 2021. So, I mean, yeah, they really are kicking into full gear here. What's been interesting is I've been looking into this a little bit for my own reporting, and some, you know, foreign policy or geopolitical experts do bring up some interesting concerns with this. So, for instance, as Korea builds a reputation as a major player in the defense industry, it might get further pressure from the U.S. to have some kind of pact or agreement that it's going to back the U.S. in some kind of conflict. This is totally hypothetical, right? With China, it might upset China, as we've seen in the past with some of its increased capabilities. In the Middle East in particular, I mean, Korea has supplied weapons systems, defense systems, artillery to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. That's kind of a tough line to walk when Gulf and Middle Eastern countries have their own internal conflicts, right? So I think it could create a little bit of a tightrope that Korea will have to walk more carefully in the same way that it's balancing its relationship with China and the US. But in terms of sheer monetary value and the potential for better self-defense, I can see why politicians are investing in it.
Right, and staying with the idea, with defense building, Steven, South Korea is awaiting Canada's decision for its preferred bidder for new submarines. First, how significant is this submarine decision for Canada's defense policy?
I think it's significant in a number of ways, just in terms of its total size. It's one of the biggest military contracts in Canadian history. It could be up to a dozen vessels, and there's at least one estimate saying that it could be worth as much as $70.4 billion. So it's a major thing, and like I said, I think there's a few elements to it. One just being that Canadian Prime Minister Carney has talked a lot about the need for middle powers like Canada to foster various different relationships with other middle powers and to not rely on superpowers like the United States in the way that they did for a long time. And Canada, in terms of its foreign policy and its defense policy, has always had this kind of affinity with Europe. It's always seen itself as being either formally or informally or culturally aligned with Europe and having shared objectives, things that go back to World War II and the fact that Canada was in large part established by immigrants from Europe. And so I think that's kind of weighing on Canadian policymakers, that the decision that they make here will sort of signal something about their future intentions. Like, do they continue to see their military future as being in sync with Europe's, or would they look elsewhere? South Korea has a few things going for it. I mean, Kelly just laid out some of this. Like, as a defense exporter, it has a reputation for being quite cost effective, for being speedy in delivery, for being quite diligent in repairs, and a lot of things that a lot of clients want. But in defense and foreign policy, there are practical concerns and there are bigger, sort of more symbolic concerns. And I think Carney is weighing both of those. And just domestically, he's now doing something that I think is kind of new for a Canadian Prime Minister, where he's attempting to leverage a major weapons purchase for domestic political ends. So he's kind of putting it on both the Korean and the German bidders to sweeten their deals and to maybe offer, maybe it's automotive investment, or it's, the little of, if you want this, what more can you do? So I think it's an evolution for a Canadian Prime Minister, and I think it's an example of Carney sort of reckoning with the bigger tensions that he sees in the world and the bigger challenges that are facing Canada as a middle power with some economic challenges and some demographic challenges and a lot of new security challenges.
Right. Based on the most recent media coverage of the pending Canadian decision, Kelly, what can you tell us about the prospects of South Korea winning this bid and the competition it faces from Germany?
Well, based on the analysis that I've seen out there, as well as just some of the straight news coverage, I don't think anyone really knows. When you read Korean media, right, it sounds like Korea is pretty close to clinching this deal. I can't read German media, but I would assume they're probably saying the same. I think Steven brought up a lot of the important kind of greater symbolic things that are at play. Korean media really argues that it offers efficiency, cost effectiveness. Maybe there's an opportunity for some kind of new forefront in the Korea-Canada relationship that stands to benefit Canada. I mean, it clearly benefits South Korea. It would be the largest deal, I think, in Canadian military history, is what I read, in terms of dollar value at least. But then again, I mean, Canada has really signaled that it's very important to keep up kind of a unified front on the war in Ukraine. Maybe there's some kind of greater desire to symbolically make a gesture to Germany instead. Germany has a longer, more storied reputation in this area. So when you're talking about that big of an investment, I mean, that you might want to consider that. I really don't know. I think for Korea, this is kind of like a notch in the belt or a trophy on the shelf when it's thinking about really boosting the reputation of its defense industry. And Korea in general tends to hold kind of Western, European, North American countries in a very high regard, where that's kind of the bastion of growing one's reputation. So even though it's already a major player in the Middle East, I think it really wants the prize of that deal. But who's going to get it? I really don't know, and I don't think others know either.
Yeah, neither do I. Stephen, I wonder, how could Canada's choice that is, reshape perhaps its future defense cooperation with South Korea?
Well, it would deepen that cooperation in a new and kind of unprecedented way. I mean, just beyond the immediate dollar value of the deal, after this deal, if it were to be signed, it would involve, a decade or however many decades of maintenance and upkeep and repairs and replacement parts and all the rest. And it would set a precedent. It would set a precedent of for Canada, that Canada is looking to South Korea and maybe more broadly to Asia as a significant defense partner, and that it is maybe less wedded to its older ideals of cooperation with more sort of culturally like-minded countries in Europe. And then for Korea, I mean, Kelly just alluded to, Korea has long wanted to break into the market of selling its defense project to really major economies. I mean, most of its business comes from the Middle East, from Poland, from countries in Latin America, and this is a threshold that the country has really long wanted to cross, even though Canada is not a major military power by any means. I grew up in Canada, and for most of my youth, I didn't even really know that my country had a military. I thought we just kind of relied on our much more powerful neighbor. But it would have a very symbolic importance, and it would, the defense is a notoriously lumpy industry because you get these massive contracts that then kind of have to tide the industry or tide certain companies over for a long time. So this would not just be this one purchase, it would be this purchase to make these vessels, and then there would be a very long commercial relationship of maintaining them and servicing them. And then I think it would allow Korea to then go to other clients and kind of uphold this submarine deal and say that, we've gotten this seal of approval and we can bring this expertise to new and bigger clients. And so it would set a meaningful precedent in a number of ways, I think.
Right. Meanwhile, back here on the national front, Kelly, South Korea recently shared plans for drone warrior training. Could you tell us a bit more about this training?
Yeah, I thought this was a little interesting. First of all, this is kind of in the name of modern warfare, right? A lot of warfare today is drone warfare, but South Korea basically announced that it was going to train 500,000 people on how to operate drones for military purposes, purportedly in the name of defense against North Korea. Based on what I read, it seems like this is, on one part, just another effort to modernize, be ahead of the technology, to also increase Korea's own monitoring capabilities. So as we've seen over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, monitoring within the inter-Korean border, there's been a couple of mishaps. The military has been reportedly understaffed. There's not enough people that are draftable, quite frankly. And so this might be a better way to handle this issue, where you have more people that can operate more things remotely when you don't have the physical infantrymen that you once had posted along the border and elsewhere. But I can't say it's surprising. It's just you don't hear much about drones. It's kind of a loaded subject within Korea in general. South Korea's really an early adopter of a lot of technology, but because of the proximity to North Korea and the fears of, sparking some kind of conflict or being accused of espionage, the use of drones is generally a lot more prohibited within Seoul, especially, than in other places. But yeah, I think this is just another front of Korea thinking about its self-reliance, its self-defense, proving another use case in defense technology as well as offensive technology. And yeah, we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Right, especially within this current environment of geopolitics. All right, Kelly, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow for a panel session on life in Seoul and more.